Ladies and gentlemen, Strength Matters webinars are proud to present to you the absolutely incredible Georgie Fear of AskGeorgie.com and, of course, her book, Lean Habits for Lifelong Weight Loss. And at the end of the webinar, I'm pretty sure Georgie will give you more information of where you can find her, find out about her, and possibly get in touch with her coaching groups online as well as the Facebook groups. But presenting to us today, Untangling Yourself for your clients from emotional eating and binge eating is a huge Strength Matters pleasure for Georgie Fear. Take it away, G!
Thank you, Seb, for the wonderful intro. It's always a pleasure to do anything associated with Strength Matters. You guys are just a wonderful group, and I love presenting at the Strength Matters summits, and getting to do a webinar is never hard to twist my arm because I love doing them. So This topic is a ton of I hate to say it's a ton of fun, but it is a ton of fun. Partly because it's not one of the topics that we hear about, left and right from, media, and there's not a lot of education for trainers or nutrition pros out there about how to deal with these topics. They're kind of like the sketchy side ones that when they arise, we kind of hope we can give that client to someone else. But one of my favorite things to do is show people that you don't have to worry so much about how to talk about this stuff with your clients. Some really, really simple things can help you, manage the situation, and you don't have to be a therapist. Definitely we all want to stay within our scope of practice. None of us want to play psychoanalyst. It can just get a bit sticky, but there's definitely some great tips that I can share with everyone for how you can talk to your clients about this. And Seb actually requested this topic specifically, so thank you, Seb.
You are very welcome, Georgie. Thank you very much for bringing it to us.
No sweat. So let's go to the next slide.
Okay, there we go. Glad that's working.
Yay! So the stuff that I want to talk about today, really, what are emotional eating and binge eating? If we can think about what exactly we're referring to when we use those terms, well, that's important because some people may mean different things when they use those words. Why do people do that? Especially if you've never experienced this yourself, or if this is not something that you have struggled with, it can look a bit strange. It can be like, why are people eating because they're sad when it's really just making them feel worse? It can. So we'll talk a bit about why it becomes a habit and why it perpetuates itself as a habit, despite all the seemingly unpleasant consequences. Third, on a more practical side, how to talk about it with your clients. Not exactly the type of topic where you want to just walk up and be like, so, been binging lately? No, it's definitely a topic where we want to use some tact, use some gentleness, and some respect for people, because this is a vulnerable area. And then how you can help with habit-based coaching. A lot of people out there know that what I specialize in is coaching people through habits as opposed to giving them diets or prescriptive programs and asking them to follow them. So we kind of work as a team to think about small behaviors done consistently on a daily basis. And then super important, the fifth point is, when do you want to refer someone out? There's certainly the potential for a situation to arise where somebody's emotional eating or binge eating is really gone to a level at which they're better served by a mental health professional and not necessarily a fitness professional. So we'll talk about some of the things that you can use to make that determination and how you can mention that to your client without them feeling like you are pushing them aside because they're too loony for you. Sound good?
Sounds mega to me.
Awesome. Let's go on to the next one.
Here we go.
Okay, so the characteristics of emotional eating and binge eating have a lot of overlap. Both of them are, eating, and both of them are typically responding to stimuli that are not hunger. So emotional eating can be eating a normal amount of food, or it can be overeating. And it typically occurs in response to negative emotion. Now, we're all familiar also with how positive emotions can lure us to overeat. You go out, celebrate your birthday, and you feel like it doesn't count, it's my birthday, I'm gonna have the double nachos, and sure, throw a chalupa on top of that. That doesn't fall under the emotional eating spectrum in terms of what research looks at as much. That tends to be a bit of a different phenomenon. Usually it's emotions like sadness, grief, trauma, isolation, fear, being afraid of something. And one interesting phrase that I've seen used in research that often precedes an episode of emotional eating is something they call tense tiredness, which is, I like those two words, which is why I quoted them exactly. Often people are getting a state where they're agitated, but they're also just really exhausted by the end of the day. So they kind of want to unwind, but they don't feel like they can unwind. And that seems to be a really common trigger for people who have an emotional eating habit to start acting on that habit. Binge eating, on the other hand, also results from negative emotion most of the time. Many of the triggers are also the same, but it has a slightly more specific definition when it comes to the amount of food. Usually, the amount of food is going to be somewhat larger if someone describes binge eating. Now, there certainly is variability. People will use different words in their language. Somebody might say, I totally binged and had 2 bowls of cereal. But that's going to be a bit of an anomaly. Most people that say, when they use the word binge, they're talking about everyone would agree this is a larger than usual amount of food. I've worked with clients that would go through multiple boxes of cereal, or 12 cinnamon rolls, or a box of donuts, or an entire loaf of bread. Those are the type of portions that are often involved with binge eating. And of course, it's a scope, it's a scale or a spectrum. So we can't really draw a line at any one point, but it also doesn't matter all that much. It's not like after 6 slices of bread, you're not binge eating, but after the 7th slice, you are. More importantly, it's that feeling of loss of control that someone experiences that characterize if it's a binge, and distress. People are often not having a good time when they're eating this food. Another thing worth noting is that it is almost invariably done in secret. I don't know if I've ever had a client say that they had a binge episode with somebody else around. So that's another important thing just to notice in case you're thinking about what these two phenomena look like and how they can impact somebody's life. They are related to each other. So somebody that's affected by an emotional eating habit is more likely than the average person to engage in binge eating, and vice versa. Someone who engages in binge eating is also likely to have emotional eating responses as well, even if it doesn't fully move to a binge. As would be expected, they both also correlate with obesity. Both of these tend to increase calorie intake and not involve compensatory calorie burning mechanisms, so they do tend to lead to a weight gain over time. Does that all make sense to you, Seb?
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely, definitely. It's just one of those very sensitive subjects that we don't hear much about. So, yeah, I think this is quite. I think for some people, this is going to be quite an emotional listen. Really,
Okay.
One as well.
Well, we're a non-judgmental, helpful group at Strength Matters, so it's
Absolutely.
totally all right. And nobody can see each other.
Yeah.
I love the internet. All right, let's go to the next slide.
Next slide. There we go.
All right, so this kind of falls into like, why do people do that? I work with people all the time that have various frequencies of these behaviors, and at some point, it's totally logical to ask, like, this person's emotional eating habit has resulted in them becoming overweight and worsening their arthritis. It's lowered their body confidence. It's impacted their relationships. They're spending $100 a week on binge food. Why would someone keep doing that? But there's a lot of research that goes into why these problems develop because they are so frequent. So binge eating and emotional eating can be best described as coping mechanisms. And like other coping mechanisms, such as drinking alcohol, abusing substances, or impulsive spending or gambling habits, they provide relief from negative emotions. And if we had a better way to manage stress, odds are that we wouldn't do them. So if somebody's feeling those negative emotions, emotional eating or binge eating can help them cope with it, help them feel less of what they are feeling. They fall under the realm of experiential avoidance in the literature, which means lessening how intensely we are present to our current moment. I think we've all had the experience of something awful going on in our lives, and you just wish you could dig a hole and dive into it. I certainly have, those moments of extreme embarrassment or extreme distress where you just wish you could quit like it was a video game and start over. And that type of desire to bolt from your own life is what somebody experiences before they engage in emotional eating or binge eating. And as a person who does not struggle with these habits, I know that I simply have different coping mechanisms than someone who does that. It's not a matter of willpower or strength. It's just a habit. My coping mechanism for stress may be to go for a walk or to seek my husband to talk with. He's, my sounding board for everything. But it certainly can be that someone has just developed the habit where they've repeated it on a daily basis. If I don't have something else better to do, eating a row of Oreos will help me not feel so focused on that argument they had today, for example. So plain English definition, people do it to feel better, or they do it just to feel less. It's really common for people who engage in emotional eating and binge eating to describe a numbness or a zoning out that occurs when they're in the middle of that behavior. And it seems as if it were about the food, people would want to tune in. Like, hey, if I'm eating this awesome, crunchy, sweet cereal, I should want to tune in and experience it. But to somebody who's binge eating especially, they often don't even remember too much of it. They kind of just numb out and they regain their full awareness after there's all of this remnants around them, the empty box of cereal, the empty carton of milk, the chip wrappers. So it's often it makes one feel very powerless at its extremes. So why do they continue when the outcomes are so unpleasant? If someone comes to after emotional eating or binge and they feel so awful, what makes them choose to do it again? The answer to that can be understood in the context of habits. Just as I wake up and I tend to, go to the same side of my bedroom to find my clothing in the morning, I don't have to think too much. It just kind of happens. I learned when I first moved into this apartment, okay, that's where my pants and socks and shirts are. So even in my 90% asleep state, I can just kind of wander over there and get dressed before I come to. That's typical of a habit. We start with something, more consciously. I had to think the first time I lived in this apartment, like which drawer did I put the shirts in, which drawer did I put the socks in? But after we've done it repeatedly a number of times, it can just happen without too much thought. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody and we can understand like, oh, okay, so if something becomes a habit, then somebody's not really thinking about it. But logically, that also presents a bit of a stumper question on how do you change it? Because if I'm not deciding to do it of my own free will and it's just kind of happening under the radar, how on earth can we get in there ahead of it to change the course of action? So that is one of the things we'll talk about on the next slide.
There we go.
Thank you, Seb. So how do we learn something, or how do we learn to do something without thinking? So there's a lot of handy research that's been done and on neuroscience and habit formation and behavior. So lucky people like me can just sit on our computers and learn all of this stuff, and I find it fascinating. There's just nothing that intrigues me quite as much as people's eating behavior. I don't know why, I just love it. So often things begin as goal-directed learning. Now, I don't think anybody has ever decided, let me start a binge eating habit, or let me start an emotional eating habit, because that sounds like something I really want to practice. But it is a totally understandable thought to think, oh, this hurts so much. I really want to feel better. Oh, that's tasty. And then to just look for the closest pleasurable thing, which often is food. In today's society, food is cheap, it's abundant, it's just about everywhere. And regardless of our income level, we can have tasty, sugary, crunchy, or fried things on a regular basis. It's also a fact that for a lot of people that don't have close human relationships, a good friend, a spouse, a sibling that lives with them, somebody that they can talk to, that food is available 24/7. If you wake up at 2 in the morning and you need someone to talk to, Ben and Jerry are always there if you have them in your freezer. So that pervasiveness of food can make it a really convenient option. And convenience is huge when it comes to habitual behavior. So once we engage in emotional eating several times, and often this can happen as a child or a teenager, we have a breakup and your best friend is like, let's go get frappuccinos, take your mind off of it. After we do that a few times and we do feel better, we notice that there's a reward, and what gets rewarded gets repeated. So the next time that we're in a blue mood, we remember, hey, that frappuccino kind of gave me a boost. So if we keep going and getting the reward, we keep reinforcing the behavior. Now, initially, let's say you take an animal in a cage and you give it a reward for doing something, say pressing a lever to get a sugar solution. If you replace the sugar solution with water after a period of time, the animal stops. The reward will stop the behavior if the reward disappears. So interestingly enough, if that animal has been conditioned for a long enough time, or if a human has repeated a behavior at a high enough frequency and a high enough consistency, it can transition to what we call stimulus response learning. And that's a bit scary because we're just learning to react to a situation as opposed to getting a reward. So in the context of the topic I'm talking about today, somebody may initially eat to feel better, but eventually they just eat when they feel bad, even if it's not making them feel better anymore. They just continue to do it, often to their own complete bafflement. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody, and I'd like everybody in the audience to hopefully come away from this with the feeling that these are habits that just about anybody can get into. It's not a reflection of lower intelligence or lower weak willpower or any real flaw in a person. It's almost just a pattern recognition that takes hold. So let's move to the next slide if nobody's got any questions or anything.
Next slide then. There we go.
Right along. So how can you talk to your clients if you think this might be, on their landscape? The most important thing I can say is talking about it respectfully and gently is really important. There are some things that you can joke about. There's emotional eating and binge eating tend to not be one of the wiser ones to talk about, because even if you make a joke about it and your client laughs, your client may never show up again. These topics are often full of layers and layers of shame, secrecy, and vulnerability. So it's very important to just to remember that the person that you're speaking with could be really hurting. So if your client brings this up, that is a wonderful sign that your client trusts you. If a client says, honestly, I think I was just sad and I didn't know what else to do, so I stopped at the convenience store and I bought a bunch of candy bars. If somebody brings up that topic with me, usually the first thing that instinctively I say is, thank you for telling me that. That's kind of a tough thing to throw out there, isn't it? Yeah, right? Like it's somebody just told you something pretty heavy and truthful about themselves. So it's a really good feather in your cap as a fitness professional that you have created a judgment-free relationship that your client trusts you to not go, what the hell is wrong with you? So it's good if your clients start to share this stuff with you. Ask. That third bullet is a really kind of direct and simple direction, but it's really that simple. If I'm talking about a food log, let's say, with a client, and they're telling me, okay, I ate this on Thursday, I ate this on Friday. Oftentimes, the way I will ask is to simply ask them, was this because you were hungry or was it because you were feeling something else? So it's a very kind of casual way to throw it out there, because honestly, a lot of times it's not necessarily emotional eating from sadness or grief or fear. It's more like I got bored. There's other reasons that could be not hunger. So I kind of try to differentiate first if a given meal or snack was due to hunger or other. And then if we determine that it's other, well, what was going on? Is it that you were bored? Is it that you were trying to soothe yourself from some sort of negative emotional state beforehand? And once you're talking about it, you have done something really productive already. Just by inviting a person to think about why they engaged in that behavior and bringing it out of secrecy, you've already done a huge, huge amount, even if you don't give them any tips or practical strategies to change it. So that's a point I really do want to make. A little empathy goes a long way. Even if you've never experienced these specific challenges, it's nice for a client to hear, I've done things that I wasn't proud of when I was in a bad mood too. Or, that's really hard to, have taken an action and then feel the next day like you wish you hadn't. Like, I've done that too, but, don't worry. So sharing your experience too goes a long way toward that warm human connection. I think it's a good idea to share the normalcy of it. Sometimes people will preface their statement with, this might sound crazy, but, or, okay, I'm sure you're going to laugh at me, or, well, this is stupid, but, and whenever a client leads into whatever they're saying with those kind of qualifiers, usually my first response is, that's so normal. That's so understandable. Lots of people eat for emotional reasons. I don't have any firm numbers. I tried to look them up, but they're all over the charts depending on how we define emotional eating and what population we're looking at. But safe to say, greater than 50% of the population eats for negative emotions at some point. So really, it's nothing bizarre or strange. It doesn't make somebody an outlier in any sense. It makes them completely human. I also like to point out the non-permanence of these issues. So if somebody says, I'm an emotional eater, I've always been an emotional eater, I kind of change the wording around to put it in the past. Like, okay, Jane, I understand that in the past you've eaten for emotional reasons, but that doesn't mean that will be your future.
That's really good. I like that one.
Awesome. Yeah, it's huge. Just changing the language that somebody uses. And I like to point out with people that they've changed other habits before. I think we all have this kind of logical fallacy that the habits we have now we're stuck with. But who has not changed a habit before? I mean, the fact that you've learned to walk changed your habit from crawling on the floor. As I've gotten older, thank heavens that I changed a lot of habits I had when I was, say, 15 or 21. So just as you changed your habits and maybe you became more financially responsible, or you get up on time, or you go to bed on time when you didn't previously, emotional eating and other food habits are not permanent. It's just a matter of rehearsing different strategies, and that's exactly what I can help you with as a professional. So try to avoid calling someone an emotional eater. They may refer to themselves as an emotional eater. And I recommend exactly what I just mentioned a moment ago of saying, well, that's a behavior that you've done in the past. It's not you. Like, you may have also walked your dog today, but you're not a dog walker, if I have to describe you. I also try to avoid using the word binge before your client does. That's something that I say to every coach that I work with at some point. The last thing you want is for your client to come to you thinking they just eat too much, and then you use the word binge, and they leave thinking they've now got some disorder that you've diagnosed them with, that they didn't, they feel weirder than when they walked into the conversation. So I never use the B word unless a client brings it up. And then I usually ask them, what do you mean by that? Because some people are describing a large amount of food. Some people are just describing it just a casual evening where they may have had too many drinks. So it doesn't always mean the same thing. Okay, I think I've covered all the topics on this one. We can go for our next slide.
Next slide coming up. There we go.
Okay, we're talking about it. Now that you're having a conversation with your client, you've already started helping them. So if you want to take the next step, like, what sort of steps can I do with my client? How can I give them a tip or something that will help? I like to suggest ask some open-ended questions about the triggers of the behavior. So an example of how this conversation could happen totally normally. I'm looking at someone's food log. We talk about, okay, so I see you stopped and you had some potato chips for dinner on Thursday and then didn't really feel like a normal dinner. So what was going on there? Was it hunger or was it something else? So first we differentiate if this was hunger or other. And the person says, oh, no, I wasn't hungry. Oh, okay. So what do you think you were feeling? Was it just boredom on a long drive, or maybe something else going on? See what they say. If the person says, I had an argument with my boss, honestly, I was just feeling crummy, and they describe a negative emotional state, and then they tell you, I just decided that I wanted the chips and the chips would taste good, so I went in and I got them. So once the person's given you a specific example of what led to one incident, I like to ask if that's something that's happened before. Is this a bit of a pattern that you've sensed in your own experience? And that can help, because usually this stuff is patterned. It's usually not a one-off. And if somebody says it's a one-off, I've never done that before, honestly, you probably don't even have to address it, because if somebody's doing something once a year, it's probably not impacting that much physically or psychologically. So if someone does say, yeah, it is kind of a regular thing. If it's not potato chips, it's a candy bar. If I'm feeling crappy after a long day, it's just the type of thing I do. Well, now you've got a conversation going about what are the triggers. Usually triggers are going to be emotional states, but sometimes they're not specifically emotional states. Sometimes someone's trigger can be a place. Like every time I'm in that Friday morning meeting, they put me on the spot. They ask me about my work progress that week. I feel stressed, and I start eating the cookies on the table. So they might even link it to, well, of course there's stress involved in that example, but it can just be that every time they walk into that board meeting room, they see the cookies and they know they're going to eat them. Sometimes it's a friend, believe it or not, a person that somebody often gets together with, and they complain about something in their lives and they eat muffins. So sometimes there's a friend that is linked to the emotional eating behavior. So once somebody's, you've had a conversation with somebody like, oh, what are these triggers? There's a few things that you can do. I'm going to talk about those a bit more on the next slide, but I don't want to go there just yet. I just want to overview a little bit. So what we want to do when we give someone a habit to practice, what are we going for? We're not trying to psychologically cure someone of trauma they may have experienced when they were a kid. We obviously don't want to, do anything that's invasive personally. Like there's sometimes an element of like, I don't want to get too into your business if you don't want to tell me something. Basically, any habit that you can give somebody that helps them decrease the frequency of the behavior is helpful. Often we might be thinking, I really wish I could just give someone the cure so they will stop having an emotional eating habit. But that's not exactly realistic. And often the client will have that same expectation. If I can't stop doing this, then I'm not succeeding. I'm still the emotional eater. I'm still failing at this. So I think it's really important that, when we're conversing about this with clients and talking about potential solutions, that we set the expectation that we're winning if we're decreasing the behavior. If you end up going from emotional eating every day or every other day to once a month, even if you do it once a month for the rest of your life quality and your health is going to be better for it. And then just in terms of logistics, we try and narrow it down to one behavior to practice at a time. Often in this conversation, lots of different ideas and topics will come up. So at the end, you want to circle back and say, okay, let's just pick one of these and focus on trying to do that for the next week or 2 weeks. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and talk about what kind of specific habits might be applicable.
Okay, here we go.
So there's a lot of habits that can help, and they can range from everything to pressing pause, getting more sleep, drinking more water. A lot of things can interrupt an emotional eating incident. If I divide the habit-based approaches to decreasing emotional eating, we can kind of put them in 3 categories. The first one would be reducing someone's exposure to the triggers. If you don't have ice cream in your freezer, then you're not going to have that same trigger of after the kids go to bed, the pattern of going to the refrigerator and eating the ice cream. So different ways that you can engineer your environment can reduce the triggers. I had a client yesterday who shared with me that she has identified a pattern on a specific day of the week that she goes to classes at a university and she has to walk past the convenience store. And it's just become a trigger that every time she walks past that convenience store on the way to a class she doesn't want to go to, she goes inside and she buys some unhealthy food. So what she's going to do next week, and this is just awesome that she came up with this plan totally on her own, she just said, I'm going to park in another parking lot so I don't walk past the convenience store on my way to class. And that's just brilliant. Another example of how the coach doesn't have to do anything sometimes. The clients are so good at this. The second kind of bucket into which habits can help would be if we can assist someone with interpreting their triggers differently. And what I mean by that is that the same circumstance can happen, but if we don't feel the same way inside, if it doesn't bring up the same fear and dread and anxiety within us, it's less likely to trigger maladaptive behaviors. The third bucket of habits which can help somebody is if we just act in a different way, introducing some other behavior that interrupts or makes it less convenient or outright impossible to eat emotionally or binge eat. Reinforcing that habit, as an alternative can be really helpful. So stop binge eating is not the habit. Stop emotional eating is not the habit. If it were that simple, your client would have stopped long ago, I assure you. So let's talk about the first bucket. So reducing exposure to triggers. Specific habits that my clients have used would be having 3 drinks maximum. Often one of the triggers is getting too inebriated. If you just get into that 3, 4, or 5 drinks, it lowers your inhibitions, it decreases your prefrontal cortex activity, that part of your brain that says, how am I going to feel about this in a few hours? That just kind of gets quieter. So limiting your exposure to alcohol is very helpful. A second one is putting away the scale. Oftentimes the scale is one of the triggers that leads to negative emotions, a feeling of futility and powerlessness, which leads someone to eat emotionally. And logically, it doesn't help someone with losing weight. So it's just helping them break a bad cycle to get rid of the scale for a while. Working out where there aren't mirrors is a strategy that can help people just not be so body critical or get, comparing to other bodies in the gym. Taking a midday lunch break or laying down after work, you may not think that those have too much to do with eating, but oftentimes when we peel back the layers, we discover that emotional eating and binge eating are the only excuse someone gives themselves to just stop working for a little while. If the only rest you give yourself is, well, I have to eat, eating's a basic human function, you're going to keep doing it. So it's normal, natural, and necessary to take breaks. So I do have to talk some of my clients into taking a lunch break because they'd rather work through lunch. Or sometimes, laying down for 5 or 10 minutes after work. And if somebody gives me pushback, like I don't have time, as soon as I get home, I don't have time, I can't come home and lay down, it can be handy to point out that they previously made 5 or 10 minutes to graze out of the cabinets. So if you had 5 or 10 minutes to graze out of the cabinets, you have 5 or 10 minutes to put your head on the pillow. So sometimes reminding clients that they do have time. If they've got time for binge eating, they've got time for rest. And the most obvious one would be not keeping trigger foods at home, making them slightly less convenient by letting Stop and Shop do the storing for you, keeping them down the street at the convenience store. They're still accessible, they're just not too convenient. The second kind of bucket of interpreting triggers differently, that one is the one that I think takes the most experience, finesse, and emotional management skills. So for the most part, I recommend referring to mental health professionals if you think that that's what somebody needs or if these other two aren't working. And the reason I say that is because it can be a bit more than, a bit more than most people want to get into, to start talking with people about having different emotional responses to the events of their day. I do it with my clients. I didn't do it until I had, a fair amount of experience and some, a baseline level of training and coursework. So I think for the purposes of this webinar, I would say, let's stay out of that bucket and focus on 1 and 3, because those are easier and less intimidating for most professionals. So the third one of acting in a different way. So that's on our next slide, actually.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. So alternate actions. When you figure out the rewards, so like, why are we doing this? What is it that's actually making you feel better? If you can identify that it's stress relief, that it's calming down, that it's zoning out, feeling indulged, you can think, okay, what else might help you feel that way? And a lot of times I'll just leave that to my clients to come up with a list. Like, oh, why don't you come up with something? Like, what else helps you calm down? I'm sure food isn't the only thing that has ever calmed you down. Well, let's come up with a list here. And clients vary, some relatively easily seem to rattle off, honestly, if I just took a bath, it would be so much better. And Oh, awesome. You sure made that easy for me. Sometimes people will say, oh, I can play the piano. I can work on that coloring book that I have. I can, if I want to zone out, I can just, why don't I just throw on the TV? Yeah, no reason not to do that. If the client has a bit more resistance, sometimes they'll say, nothing else works. Or when I get into that state, all I want is the food. It doesn't sound appealing to take a bath. It doesn't sound appealing to take a walk. I admire that person for their honesty, first of all, because it's much better that they say that than they say, yeah, sure, I'll take a walk, and then they don't do it. So if somebody's kind of sharing with you that they don't really feel like other things will stand a chance because they're not rewarding enough, I like to talk about each alternative option as having costs and benefits. Like, for example, if you are going to emotionally eat, there's a certain financial cost. It's pretty low. It's only $1 or $2 for a good amount of cookies. There's an emotional cost, which can be pretty high if you feel poorly about yourself afterward. There's a health cost, expanding waistlines, worsening blood sugar management, feeling less fit. There's a self-esteem cost. So there's quite a bit of costs associated with that action. So even if the reward seems like, well, that really is the thing I want to do most, some of these other behaviors, they have benefits, but they are dramatically lower on the cost side. It really doesn't cost you too much to go for a walk, flip on the TV, do some art or play the piano. So often we can help show people that even if these alternates don't seem to be quite as rewarding, they're so much less costly that it may be worth trying. I also like to propose it that way. It's really just try it out. It doesn't have to be like the be all and end all perfect solution. Let's just do an experiment. Let's just try one of these, see if it sticks, see if it helps even a tiny bit. And if it bombs dismally, that's fine. We'll brainstorm another list and we'll come up with some other alternates next time. I'd like to ask a client how they will remember, because when we get into that emotional state, none of us are thinking 100% clearly. So sometimes sticking a visual reminder can help. Like if I leave my shoes next to the door, I'll remember that I wanted to take that walk right when I get home before I start cooking dinner. So simple things like that. Often people who have pets will say, well, if I just take the dog for a walk, that'll work. And the dog automatically reminds me by knocking me over when I come in the door. So that will work. One option clients rarely think of is doing nothing. So often I ask if I can make a suggestion to add to their list, and assuming they say, yes, please, I suggest just sitting there and doing absolutely nothing is a valid option. Even if you can only sit there for 30 seconds and then you go repeat your undesired behavior anyway, those 30 seconds weaken the conditioned response. So if you can wait 30 seconds before emotionally eating, you are working on weakening your emotional eating habit. So sometimes that sounds great when somebody's in that tense tiredness state. I'll point out, you're tired. The easiest thing to do is sit there. Like, yeah, who would have thought? Who would have thought you could lose weight by practicing sitting there? Like, is that awesome or what?
Yeah, that's great. Wow.
Yeah. So just weathering the feeling was really eye-opening to me. I've battled depression and anxiety throughout my entire adult life. And the day that somebody said to me, I realized I could just sit there and feel it, and that it was okay to feel depressed, like totally was a big dramatic realization for me, because up to that point, I was in the habit of trying to do things to feel less depressed when I was having a down day. I was running, I was going to the gym, I was using the light therapy box, I was journaling, I was making sure I had my omega-3 fatty acids, I was doing all of these proactive things and basically exhausting myself as well in the process. So when somebody posed, honestly, I can actually just accept that emotion and tolerate it. It gave me a huge open door personally, which is really, really handy when you're feeling wiped out. So let's go to the next slide if I put one up. I can't even recall if I have another one.
Let's have it. Hey!
Supporting habits. Cool. Other stuff that might help, reaching out to another person. If somebody's not really socializing daily or weekly, that can be a great thing to add in there to just balance out their life. Putting how you feel into words. is a really, really powerful habit, even though it looks on the surface like a little fluffy, a little woo-woo. How on earth is journaling going to do anything? It actually is supported by research that people who struggle with these types of eating issues, they often have difficulty identifying their emotional states. So if somebody's journaling, it involves the translation of experiencing your emotion into words. So simply writing down, I and disappointed.
Sorry, Georgie, I'm just going to ask you to repeat that last bit because the sound went just a little bit funny there.
Oh, sorry about that. We'll blame the connection.
Yeah.
So I was saying that people that struggle with these habits of emotional eating and binge eating typically have less ability to put their emotions into words. So if you're talking to another person, you have to translate your experience into words. And the same thing if you're journaling. So if I start to journal and I say, I am dejected and disappointed, I've now identified 2 words rather than just this feeling of blah, bad, cookie. Actually turning it into an English word or whatever language someone speaks, it helps us to understand it better and to specify it better. So that skill actually is shown to help people, and it's something that they can do completely on their own. So if this is an idea that appeals to you, give it a try. Try writing down what you feel like before you instinctively grab food, because you may discover that it's a really powerful skill. Not necessarily the first time you do it, but after you've done it a few times, your skill increases at identifying what emotional state you're taking. And many times that leads logically into problem solving, which is the next bullet. So I like this one specifically for the types of clients who are a bit more cut and dry. My engineers love this type of angle. Problem solving. So specifically, what is my problem? Why am I in a bad mood? And the reason that the specifics are super, super critical to this succeeding is because often when we are in a negative mood or we've had a bad day, we globalize it. My life sucks. Today was rotten. And we don't specify anything. We just think everything that went wrong, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. When we start specifying what actually is going on, something like a doctor, a doctor wouldn't say, well, you're damn sick. The doctor would say, okay, you have an infection in your ear and you also have this specific problem. Once we start specifying what is going on with us, that helps us start to remedy the situation. So some questions that I encourage people to journal about. What information do I have? What more info might I need? Do I need to ask somebody instead of wondering that? Where can I get the info? What options are available? And by that I mean actions. Like, do I want to do nothing? Do I want to wait and sleep on it and decide in the morning? Etc. And what are the cost benefits of each? Sometimes that will cross off some of the options right away. Sleep is a very important supporting habit. The susceptibility of an individual to binge eating or emotionally eating goes up dramatically when somebody is short on sleep. So a good night's sleep every night cannot be overstated in importance. Play. As adults, so many of us, we work, we may even rest and do productive stuff, but we don't specifically play. So I encourage people, do something that's creative and just for fun on a regular basis. And lastly, this is like the first time we're talking about actual nutrition stuff, include all foods in your normal eating. It's the minority, but sometimes somebody's binge eating habit goes away when they let themselves have some sugar or when they stop trying to eat a paleo diet for all the other days of the week. They find that, actually being able to have a piece of toast with my omelet prevents me from losing control at 2 p.m. and eating an entire loaf of bread. So lightening up the restriction in normal eating is another, you'd think it would be obvious, but it doesn't normally occur to people when they're looking specifically at their emotional eating or binge eating habit. Let me know, Seb, if I have another slide after that.
Well, let's have a look, eh? Hey!
When to refer out. Awesome. I do think this is the last slide. 3 days ago I made these slides. You'd think I'd remember them, but 3 days is like an eternity in my world. So when to refer out. Anytime the client even mentions considering it, do you think it would help to see a therapist? Yeah, sure. I think it's a great idea. I will always say I think it's a great idea. I've never felt that it was a bad idea to have more support. So anytime the client even mentions it, sometimes they just want permission to say, of somebody else to say, yeah, that's a good idea. It can't hurt to get a second opinion. It can't hurt to have one more person to talk to about what you're going through. So that's great. If you suspect that somebody is depressed, anxious, which I see I have misspelled on my slide, or coping with trauma or just not improving after a long time of working on this, I will often ask them if they've considered seeing somebody who's, professionally focused on helping people with their emotions. And I find that the hardest part of that is just doing it the first few times. The first few times that I was asking somebody, have you considered talking to somebody who is an expert in emotions? I was terrified that they were going to slap me in the face and be offended, like I called them crazy. And I've never had anybody had a negative reaction. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I've asked a lot of people that question if they've considered it. So yeah, I think it was just my fear. And after I saw that people were not getting upset and they often were really, really appreciative that I cared that much about their emotional health, it usually goes fairly well. I don't have a problem with it. If you need a specific referral, or the client says, I just don't know how to find someone, I typically hand out the Psychology Today URL, which you see on your screen. If you go to Psychology Today, right at the top, there's a big blue button that says find a therapist. And somebody can put in their zip code, or I believe it's zip code, maybe city, state. But then they can find people that are in their area and kind of look at their pictures, see who looks like a nice person to talk to, and try them out.
Is that, Georgie, is that worldwide, or is that just kind of over your guys' side in the world?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer, but we can probably figure it out pretty quickly.
Mega stuff. Well, if anybody knows, give it a go.
Yeah, somebody give it a try. And if not, I'm sure there's other referral networks for the other side of the pond.
Mega.
Cool. So I think that's my last slide. Can you confirm for me, Seb?
Hey, got some credits.
Nobody cares about this stuff, but it's important for me to put it up. There's 2 works cited slides. So sooner or later, Seb can throw the other one up there. And we can share the slides or works cited if people want to read more about this stuff. As I said at the beginning, this stuff fascinates me. I read about it all the time. So if you have questions, I would love to further the discussion. Usually people have lots of questions on this topic. So if anybody has questions, I'd love to take them right now.
Absolutely, guys. And, as I said before, there's a bit of a time delay for when you type your questions into when they do pop up on our screens. But I'll leave, you got this here. When you play this back, if anyone wants to know more about the actual references that was in Georgie's presentation, there you go. There's the screen. You can press pause. If I push it one more time, there we go. We got some more references right there. So when you play this back, you can press pause as well. Is there another one? Let's have a go. No, that's it, guys. Mega stuff. So while we are waiting for any questions to pop through, and I tell you what, guys, just so we know you have been listening, either send us a question or please send us your appreciation for Georgie preparing these slides and presenting I think a pretty megatastic webinar as well. It is great for me to know that you guys appreciate the work that not only Strength Matters is bringing along, but our guests are given to you guys as well. But remember, if you want to find out more about Georgie, you've got askgeorgie.com, as well as her books, Lean Habits for Lifelong Weight Loss, which, I'm still waiting to get my hands on a copy.
Hint! You still don't have a copy?
Hint. And of course, Georgie, you're actually, I was talking to a friend this morning, who I met in London, in central London. And we're just, he's building his business, and he mentioned about another nutritional organization that you know very well. And he's thinking about, I might do that. And I was like, well, hold on. I know somebody who is a huge part of that organization. And what I would recommend is maybe go to her instead. And I recommended the Facebook pages, the Lean Habit Coaching and let me have a check. Lean Habit Coaching, of course, one of your other Facebook pages. Now, I was just wondering, Are they for members only, or could anybody join in?
Well, we have got something for everybody, I have to say. There's, so assuming somebody is not a fitness professional and is just an educated eater that loves Strength Matters and wants to just get stronger and be healthy and all that, I would recommend joining the Lean Habits community. So if you search for that on Facebook, it's pretty easy to find. That is geared for just everyday people that are applying this stuff in their own lives. It is kind of based around my book, which is called Lean Habits for Lifelong Weight Loss, but no one is barred. So even if you don't want my book, you could just come on by, and it's a great supportive community for people that want to be better, living their best life. Assuming you do this as a professional, there's a couple options as well. There is a free group that both Josh Hillis of Strength Matters fame and myself organize, as well as my husband, Roland Fisher, and Stephen Ledbetter, who's another brilliant habit coaching guy. And we call that group Habit Coaching Pros. So that is also on Facebook as well, and I'm sure I can throw the link at you somewhere.
Is that, hold on a second, I just want to check, is that a different group than Habit Coaching Professionals, or are you just being cool with the kids and saying pro?
No, that is. It's Habit Coaching Professionals. I was thinking of the URL.
You cool kid.
I don't get anything perfectly accurate. It's close enough. Oh, Jenny, I just see that comment on the side. I'd love to ask a really intelligent question, but this has been great. A fantastic compliment to your book. Oh, thank you. That was so nice.
Well, ask a stupid question.
Yeah, dumb questions are good too. I think all questions are fine. So both of those are totally free resources. Come pick my brain, pick other people's brains. There are so many people out there that are wonderful to interact with. I learn stuff every day from these groups. If you're interested in kind of more hands-on personal development of your own coaching skills, if you swing by askgeorgie.com and click on Get a Mentor at the top, you can read about the mentorship opportunities that we have. We enroll for that throughout the year, so you can join on at any time and get a mentor to help you, rise above the average trainer that's going to be out of business in 2 years and become somebody that's really super skilled. And, I know that's what Strength Matters is about. It's not for beginners. It's for people that want to be intermediate to advanced. So
absolutely. And
Josh
of course, as I always say, immediate and advanced and want to help. That's my big thing on it. Definitely.
Absolutely. Why become skilled in something and keep it to yourself when there's so much fulfilling, awesome, and fun work we can do with it?
Absolutely damn stinking right. What was I going to say? As you said, you got on your website, people could click on mentorship and find out a little bit more. But how would people get in touch with you if maybe they're a little bit shy and asking in the group page for information? How can they is there a way people could get a hold of you a bit more privately?
Yeah, absolutely. To message me privately, I would use askgeorgie.com. There's a contact page. So it will just send me an email right from askgeorgie.com. So you can use that one. If you drop me a message on Facebook, I have no problem with that. I will just ask for forgiveness if there is a delay in me returning it, because as most people know, when that inbox on Facebook can be really, I don't know, it gives you that nice red indicator when you have a new one, but if you click it and read it and then it gets unhighlighted, it's too easy to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, so, don't I know about it?
Email tends to be a better one just for my personal operating system to ensure that I get back to you, but totally okay if you want to shoot me a Facebook message as well.
Cool. Well, on that note then, guys, I guess everybody has just been wow and slammed and shell-shocked with information, maybe making notes as well, or checking out all the pages. No more questions have come in. So we will say it and thank it there. But once again, everybody, if you do enjoy these webinars, the podcasts, please do let us know at Strength Matters. You can write to me at seb@realstrengthmatters.com. You can share any information, any notes, any comments, and of course, on the iTunes page from around the world, I don't care what country you are in, you can leave us comments and reviews. The reviews really do help us spread out and reach more people, because as myself and Georgie has said, we are trying to help. We don't just want to help our community, but those beyond the community as well. And for that, guys, your support is hugely appreciated. Do stay in touch via Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Remember, hashtag Strength Matters, hashtag Why I Swing. Let us know what you're doing. Let us know the great work that you guys are out there are doing, especially after this. Have you implemented any of Georgie's work into some work that you're doing with students? It is great to know this type of stuff, guys. It gets us buzzing. So, on that note then, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure once again to host a webinar, and do stay tuned for future webinars that are coming up, as well as the podcast. Having a great time there. Georgie, any last words?
I hope to see everybody in one of the Strength Matters summits next year. I will be in San Diego, Chicago, and NYC, supposedly. So, yeah, I would love to sit down and shake your hand and talk about stuff. And if there's something you want to learn more of, I could always use suggestions for my presentation topics.
There you go then. Reach out to Georgie and suggest something you're interested in. And by the way, guys, you're the first to hear that, possibly about New York City. Keep it a secret, or I swear in the name of Holy Odin, I will come and find every single one of you. Okay? And high five you in the face. On that note, guys, Georgie, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
And goodbye.